How's it going, guys? John here with the Basic Expert channel, and I'm here with a review finally. And in this video, I'm reviewing a OSR called Whitebox, Fantastic Medieval Adventure Game. Now, I have a really cool black and white cover version. I haven't been able to find it on Amazon. If I do, I'll link to it in the video description. Otherwise, I'll link to the other one I found. It's the same game. I just have a real soft spot for old school pen and ink black and white art, which is throughout the interior of this book, but I digress. This is a great little OSR game that I think could work really well in supplementing your basic fantasy game or vice versa, and I really like a lot about it. I think it's one of the better OSRs. It's very affordable, so right now you can buy this on Amazon for $4.30, which I think is a steal, and you're foolish not to get it, especially if you're really into OSRs. I think we've reached a point in the tabletop role-playing game world where we want to have these fancy like coffee table books, and it inflates the cost. The rule system inside is almost like secondary to like the slickness and design of everything. And so I really appreciate games like this that like just kind of go for that old school aesthetic in both rule set as well as art style. And Whitebox has that. So this is compatible with swords and wizardry, so I think, you know, that's obviously one of the more popular OSRs out there. This is sort of like trying to emulate that intro rule set that you would get, like the basic edition of Dungeons and Dragons from back in the 80s or whatever. So there's a lot about it that I like. Limited classes, so for instance, you are limited to only fighter, cleric, thief, and magic user. Some people might have a problem with that. I mentioned in the past, you know, how I in a Reddit thread, I gave my unpopular Dungeons and Dragons opinion, mine being that I think there's too many classes and too many races, which Whitebox, like basic fantasy, limits to elf, human, halfling, and dwarf. Unlike basic fantasy, though, it doesn't have restrictions in regards to prime attributes. However, you are punished with experience points if you do not have a 9 or higher in that prime attribute. So it kind of limits you in that regard. Like if you want to be like a really weak fighter or a really dumb magic user, it's totally possible. It's just life's gonna be a little more difficult for you. But I like the limited classes. I like the limited races. Again, like I said with that Reddit thread, I gave my opinion on that subject regarding limited classes and limited races, and I was told I was a stupid idiot, whatever. But what I like about it is that, for instance, fighters are not limited in armor or weapon. They can use ranged weapons. They can use any kind of bow, any kind of sword, any kind of edged or blunt weapon. They can wear any kind of armor, use any kind of shield. Clerics are not limited to any kind of armor, but they are limited to blunt weapons like maces, flails, mauls, those sorts of things. Magic users are limited to no armor. They cannot wear armor, and the only weapons they can use is a dagger or a quarterstaff. And magic user is limited to, thief is limited to leather armor only, but they have no restrictions on the weapon that they use. And I really like that. There's some limitations set in place so that there is some difference between the four classes, but they are a little more broad, which means that players have the ability to kind of sculpt the kind of character that they want. If you want to play a ranger, you just use the thief class and you play it like a ranger. I kind of liken it to, and I think old school D&D is kind of like this, and modern versions kind of lose this. I don't know if I've mentioned it before, but I'll mention it here for this game. I'm a big fan of Conan the Barbarian. As far as the original stories written by Howard are concerned, I think Marvel has kind of ruined the character. But the original stories are very interesting. And let me ask you a question. Is Conan the Barbarian, is he a barbarian class? You would say so, it's in the name of his character. But he does a lot of things that, like in the story of the Tower of the Elephant, where he ends up being more of a thief, or in some other stories where he's the more of a fighter, or something like that. Like he's a little more he's not as pigeonholed as you would expect him to be, given his name and what our current interpretation of like role-playing games are concerned with. Like he does sneaky things. He'll sneak into a place with like no armor on and be effective. He will put armor on and be very effective in combat. So I like that rules in these older OSR games, and in particular something like Whitebox here, where it gives players the chance to kind of experiment with stuff like that. You're not as pigeonholed. I like the lack of specialization is what I'm trying to say, and I think over-specialization is a huge problem with modern game systems in regards to the tabletop role-playing game hobby. So I like that classes and races are limited. Simple. You have prime attributes. Again, you're not punished by not being in a class altogether. Like, again, if you want to be a stupid wizard or a weak fighter, or a cleric with low wisdom, or a thief that is like all thumbs and not good at what they do, it's totally possible, but you are going to be punished. Character advancement is a little different in Whitebox. So, for instance, let me look at it here. It is not like 5th edition, where everyone levels up at the same rate, and it's 300 XP to get to level 2, 600 I think, or 900 or something like that to get to level 3. For instance, magic user, 2500 to get from level 1 to level 2. Fighter is 2000. The cleric and the thief are 1500. So people are going to level up at different rates, but obviously with a slower progression becomes more power in comparison to the quicker progression, but not quite as much of a power boost as you would otherwise assume. This brings into the question of like combat. Combat is super deadly. Players are going to want to avoid combat as much as possible because they're going to be very fragile in comparison to more modern gaming systems, as is the case with most OSR. I think that if you're into OSRs, that's part of what attracts you to them, is a deadlier game. Not that you're trying to run a meat grinder, but just that combat has consequences and players are not guaranteed to come out of it unscathed, if alive, right? Like if they're dumb when they pick a fight with the wrong thing, like, bad things will happen. So I think that's part of the draw that many of us feel towards OSRs. Even some of it is the nostalgia for those that experience those games in that era. And for me, having not grown up with that, I am attracted to the deadliness of it. So that's kind of what draws me. And again, not that I run a meat grinder, but just that physical violence has consequences within the game. It's not just... I will say, I think 5th edition rule set with the damage sponge, hit point pools, and all that kind of stuff, it does make for, or condone, or encourage murder hobo play. It's very hard to be a murder hobo in these OSR type games. But as far as if combat is being avoided, how do characters progress and get experience points? I mean, they are going to get some experience points from monsters, but it's going to be a little bit less than maybe what they're used to. Whitebox has rules for counting gold as experience. So gold found, gold earned is equivalent to 1 experience point. So players go and they are able to kill a few goblins or beat that ghost, and they get a bit of experience points for that. But they were going to be paid 2,500 gold pieces to go do that. The party itself was going to be paid that. Once they receive that gold, that's counted as 2,500 experience points as well as 2,500 gold pieces. I think it's a great rule. Makes it simple for awarding experience points, and it's an old school method that solved a problem that I think a lot of players these days struggle with. Is like, how do I award experience to players that without just like arbitrarily dealing it out, which is what you generally end up doing with like 5th edition. If they kind of get through the whole scenario without killing anything or killing minimal things, but they accomplished the goal, they finished the quest, and there wasn't very much combat. They talked their way through, or just simply avoided monsters through stealth. The using gold is totally a viable method for allowing players to gain experience and advance themselves without having to use combat and killing monsters and creatures as the method of primarily advancing their characters. So I like that. They also have rules for, if you have, for instance, you get 10% more experience points if you have like your prime attribute of 15 or more for your class. So for instance, a thief with a dexterity of 15, you could rule, let's say that there's a thief that has a charisma of 15 and a charisma of, or a dexterity of 15 as well. They would get 5% more experience points for each one, so 10% total. And so it's just another way of kind of boosting their experience points and the amount earned based on having a good character build or whatever. Personally, I think if players are avoiding combat and maybe they sneak past creatures, I sometimes give them the monster experience points for parlaying with monsters effectively or for sneaking past them effectively. Let's talk about some old school game mechanics that are prevalent in Whitebox. One of those being a descending armor class system. However, the book gives you the ability to use both descending and ascending. And I appreciate that. It's kind of gives players an option to experiment with older rule sets. They give you the charts to roll on if you're using a descending system, so you don't have to do really any math if you don't want to. But it also gives you the ascending systems as well. There's going to be a lot of stuff within Whitebox that is going to be alien to some of your players if they're coming from 5th edition. So if you're a GM who's trying to introduce your players to old school OSR games, being able to use an ascending armor class system is very helpful. And what I like is that you can switch at any point. You can switch back and forth. So maybe for a session, you can say, guys, do you want to try a descending armor class system for this session just to see if we like it? You can run it for that session, or you can have players that use both. Like maybe there's a player that really likes descending armor class and there's one that doesn't. You can have both players doing descending and ascending armor class at the same time, and there's no math that you have to worry about on your part because monster stat blocks, which are very simple, and I like that, give an armor class rating for both descending and ascending. So I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate having simplified monster stat blocks. Basic Fantasy does this, Whitebox does this. A lot of the ones that emulate the basic expert editions of D&D do this, and it makes running a game a lot less hectic than having like half a page devoted to abilities and stat blocks like in 5th edition, which I feel is just bloat, in my opinion. You don't need it. Some skills work differently. For instance, Turn Undead works differently. Clerics roll 3d6, and it's based on hit dice. Thieves, for instance, have a thievery level. At level 1, it's level 2. So, for instance, if a thief says that they want to sneak, they don't roll the dice. The Game Master is the one who rolls the dice, and the thief is always working under the assumption that they're being quiet or they're being successful at picking the lock, whether or not they actually are. So if a thief, for instance, says, I wish to sneak past the guards, they have a thievery skill of 2 at level 1, which means on a 1 to 2 on a d6, they are successful. Any other number, they fail. So what they do is they say, I'm going to try and sneak past the guard. The GM rolls, or the referee rolls the d6. The result of that is secret to the DM, because, again, the thief is always working under the assumption that they are successful at what they do. And it's up to the GM to paint the scene as to whether or not, and through discovery of that, whether or not the thief is successful at what they're doing. For instance, if they fail the roll, it's as simple as the thief kind of rolls, or the Game Master rolls the dice, they roll a 3, so they're not successful, and maybe the guard immediately turns around and goes, hey, what are you doing here? Or maybe the guard is like kind of sitting there rolling his eyes, and he's like, there's this guy that's trying to sneak behind me over here. And maybe they'll kind of let it play out for a little bit, and as soon as the thief is about to touch their hand on the door that they're trying to sneak to, the guard says, what are you doing? So it adds a little more rules light play for that kind of stuff. And the thievery skill covers anything like picking locks, moving quietly, all that kind of stuff. Thieves have like a sneak attack as well. All the classes kind of have their own little special thing like that that they're still good at. So, you know, if you like a little bit of variety in what your classes are capable of doing, Whitebox offers that for you. The game is deadly. Healing is 1 hit point a day. There's no like 5th edition where a long rest is somehow magically curing that gaping stab wound that you got from a dirty orc blade that probably was covered in an orc feces and then dipped in a bucket of pee and then ran through your gut, and you know, you didn't die, but you know, you were able to sleep it off. Totally fine, right? Whitebox does not have that. You restore 1 hit point a day. It does give you the option of binding wounds, which means I think that it's like 1 or 2d6. Characters can 1d6 hit points worth of wounds or restoring of hit points that characters are able to restore. Obviously, magical healing is one of your most effective ways, or potions, but I know some people dislike having 1 hit point a day, and I get it. It slows some things down, but I personally feel that it forces characters and players to engage in some downtime activities. Like, we got to go back to town, we got to relax, and you know, I'm pretty beat up, guys. It's going to take me a week to recover. Let's just, you know, blow some coin at the tavern. We can maybe pick up some rumors, talk to some people, get some jobs, get some work. It kind of forces that kind of play, which I think is cool. Maybe while they're resting and recovering, another party member is spending a week spreading rumors around town about the players or about an enemy, or again, gathering info. And it lends itself to highlighting downtime play, which I think is sorely lacking in a lot of 5th edition. 5th edition and 4th edition and even 3.5, I think, involved a lot of just murder hobo activity, and downtime is kind of just like, oh, do we have to? And when the game is more deadly, 1 hit point a day, it's like, oh, we have to, because I'm going to die if we keep going through the dungeon, or if I don't heal. So we have to go back to town and do some downtime stuff so I can recover. I like that. Again, with the deadliness, down to 0 hit points, you're dead. You can obviously use your own house rules and involve negative hit points if you wish, and not make death permanent, or whatever it is that you wish to do. But the rules as written in here are just brutal and just say you get to 0 hit points and you're dead. There's no death saving throws, none of that stuff. You're dead. Lastly, I want to talk about the art. I think the art in the book is great. There's a lot of quality pen and ink illustrations within the book, and I think they really stand out. They look great, and it's a great little book. And again, affordable, $4.30. What are you waiting for? Go buy it. Link will be in the video description for you to purchase it. It is through my affiliate link on Amazon, so if you use that, you support my channel, which, thank you, and allow me to get more stuff to review and check out. So, yeah, that's going to do it for Whitebox. I like it. I don't know if I'm going to run Whitebox purely as Whitebox, but there's a lot of stuff in here for my basic fantasy game that I think I could take away from. For instance, if you don't like rolling on percentile thief tables, you know, you can do like this here as well. And honestly, your players aren't even going to know, because even in basic fantasy, it is a percentile system, but the thief is not the one that rolls it. Still, the game master is. So if you don't want to avoid percentiles and use just a simple d6, it's totally feasible to import that. If there's certain things about classes, a lot of it is cross compatible. I think even you could take the as long as you're not going beyond level 12, you could take the descending armor class system from Whitebox and import it into basic fantasy if you want to have that authentic OSR experience, because for whether you like it or not, basic fantasy uses an ascending system, and I think that makes it a great introductory game into old school play. But if you want to incorporate a little bit of that descending armor class system into your game, you could steal from this and put it in that, and it would, I think, totally work. So, great little book, affordable price, good art inside, good concise rules, written well. I recommend Whitebox, if not just to have on your bookshelf. It's a good book to have as a reference, even again, if you don't run it purely as a Whitebox game. But I do have to say, I like the way they designed the character sheet. The character sheet is pretty cool. A little hand-drawn character sheet. I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff. So anyways, that's going to do it for this review. Highly recommend Whitebox. Let's talk about the channel and what I'm doing now. I mentioned in a previous video that I want to work on my own personal game, which is going to be a Aztec sort of tribal OSR kind of game. I'm kind of running into a few different problems, though. I'm feeling like the magic within the Aztec world is so different. It involved a lot of shape-shifting, and a lot of really weird, interesting things. Like, for instance, if a mother died during childbirth, the family would protect the forearm of the mother, because a sorcerer could come in and steal her forearm, and that would be a powerful magical item. So it makes for, like, really weird stuff that we're not used to, but, like, it's just different. And so I feel like I can't just use spell slots, and I can't just use all these other things for my rule set that I'm working on. So I'm kind of toying around with ideas. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. I'm kind of going for maybe a more magic users or sorcerers are a little more chaotic, and kind of will sculpt spells on the fly. I kind of like that idea, rather than like, here's a set list of spells from the SRD or from some other game system that I've just reskinned to be more Aztec-like, which I tried doing that, and there's just some spells that won't work with the setting because they just don't make sense, and it just doesn't. I like the idea of magic being a little more of a play between rules, light play between the game master and the player that is playing the magic user. So that's what I'm working on. I've also had this rule set in the back of my mind for some kind of rules light role-playing, pen and paper role-playing in the 1870s Southwest. So that's something I'm working on. It's actually almost done. I've had it for a while, and I kind of revisited it and was like, I should release this. I'm doing some of the art myself, using some public domain art as well. So it's going to be written and illustrated by me. Not going to be very long. Again, a rules light system, so it's going to be like 17 pages at most of rules as to how to play for everything you need to play in 17 pages. So if that interests you, I'll be releasing that soon, probably. I'm just working on the art for that as well. So that's kind of where I am at with my own personal projects. I'm also freelancing for various companies, Mongoose Publishing and whatnot. So trying to juggle that as well, along with raising a kid, having a family, all that kind of stuff. Running my own games, it's pretty busy. So a lot of the stuff will be released when it is released, and until then, that's what's going on my end. Thank you guys for watching. Check out Whitebox, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. I'll talk to you guys later. Hey guys, I just had an idea, and I want to run it by you as well. So, I've been talking about, how I modify rules for game systems or writing my own games. And I'm curious if that would be of interest to you as to, like, how I navigate that, and not that I have any success or anything, but, like, even something as simple as, like, using Scribus, which is a free program, like Adobe InDesign. Because if you're poor like me, you don't want to pay money to Adobe to rent software. So if you're interested in that, and like kind of like even just like how to set up a document because you want to write your own RPG or your own scenario for something, and you want to release it out there for mass consumption, if that interests you, that could be something that I work on in the future. So sound off in the comments if that interests you. I'm more than happy to kind of share how I do stuff, and maybe some good places if you're not an artist like me, so you can't make your own art. Where are some places you can find some public domain art for your own projects? So yeah, sound off in the comments if that interests you. That's something I can work on in the future as well. I'm more than happy to talk about that kind of stuff. Anyways, this is the actual goodbye. I'll see you guys later.